Well, hot dang, it's about that time, isn't it, for another NFL Draft Q&A? And yes, I know. Somebody got a haircut. Go back to Supercars. Get your $5 back, jabroni. What happened to your hairline? It's still there! How many of you can't say the same thing? And I'm 37. What about you? Anyways, thanks to all of you that took to Twitter and asked your questions. I'm going to fire through as many of these as I can in the next 15-ish minutes or so. DJ Manning kicks us off. What's a good option for the Titans at 25? A good option would be picking somebody that pans out. The non-smart-ass answer would be picking somebody, maybe an inside linebacker like Rashaan Evans, maybe an edge rusher. They could probably use that. Maybe use somebody else on the defensive line to go along with Jarrell Casey. Definitely could use some help on the interior of that line, so maybe somebody like an Isaiah Wynn who could play guard or center would make a lot of sense. Or maybe package that in a third-round pick to the Giants for Odell Beckham Jr. I'm just saying. Jeff Schlegel Jr. still thinks he's my son. Any wide receivers who catch more with their hands than their bodies in this draft? It doesn't seem like many of them. That's for dang sure. Anthony Miller, Calvin Ridley, maybe a couple others. There are an awful lot of body catchers in this draft, and I think that's one reason, even though people don't always talk about it, as to why a lot of people aren't that high on this draft class of wide receivers, and nor should they be. Sir Pugsy, favorite quarterback in this draft. My top-rated quarterback is Josh Allen. My favorite quarterback is Lamar Jackson, because there's a part of me that is rooting for him, and I want to see him succeed. Elliot Pataski, if Tremaine Edmonds and Quentin Nelson are both at 8, who would you pick if you're the Bears? Quentin Nelson, because ultimately you ride or die, succeed or fail based off of Mitchell Trubisky. Quentin Nelson provides more direct help to Mitchell Trubisky. Therefore, you take Quentin Nelson and you don't blink. Even though I like Tremaine Edmonds, Brino Jorge, rank these linebackers as prospects. Tremaine Edmonds, Reuben Foster, Miles Jack, Jalen Smith, Roquan Smith. If I had to rank them as prospects, I haven't graded Roquan yet. I have graded Tremaine Edmonds. So I have to take Roquan. I could kind of throw him in, but don't hold me to it definitively, and I might revisit Edmonds and bump him up or down a little bit. It would probably be Miles Jack 1, Edmonds 2, Roquan 3, Foster 4, Jalen Smith 5. That would probably be it. Scott Ford, what do you value more in a linebacker prospect? Run stopping or coverage? I think it depends on the position. I think it depends on the team and depends on the scheme. Honestly, for that, I look at instincts and range, especially if you're talking about some type of middle or inside backer. If I'm talking about an outside linebacker whose primary goal is to rush the passer, do I care that much about coverage? Yeah, it'd be nice, but that's not what I'm paying them for. So I think it depends on the responsibilities, the scheme, the situation, the player, as to what matters more. Ronnie Simmons, what grade did you have on Jordy Nelson in 2008? If I remember correctly, in 2008, it was a first to second round grade. I think he was the number 2 wide receiver in that draft for me. Unfortunately, I think number 1 was Limas Swede. Oops. But I was right on Jordy Nelson, I'll say that, okay? I missed one and I got one. Hell, 50-50 success rate. Better than most of these damn NFL teams. What do you know? Alex Saida, I hope I said that right. What's your perfect draft scenario for the Bears? Is that 3 to 4 quarterbacks go in the top 5? Because if that happens, it's going to be a free-for-all of big-name players at number 8 for the Bears potentially. Like if you somehow had 4 quarterbacks go in the top 5, which I don't know is going to happen, but there's a possibility, a chance it could happen. If it did, then assuming that Saquon would go number 4, that means starting at pick 6, what do you still have left? You still have Bradley Chubb, Quentin Nelson, Tremaine Edmonds, Denzel Ward, Minkah Fitzpatrick, Derwin James. If that happened, then the Bears have got to be loving life because they are going to get a stud. That's the ideal scenario for me is 4 quarterbacks going and Barkley going in the top 5. Because if it does, it sets up the Bears beautifully. Like even if Nelson went and then Chubb went, then Nelson went. You're still choosing between like Ward and Edmonds and Fitzpatrick and Roquan. That's a pretty damn good position to be in. Jake Bingham, your thoughts on defensive lineman Taven Bryan? You will just have to wait for that scouting report on him to find out what I think. Matt Holtman, grade this Bears draft. Quentin Nelson, round 1. Dorrance Armstrong Jr., round 2. Duke Ejiofor, round 4. Anthony Miller, round 4. I'm assuming that's Anthony Miller since you only bothered to give me the last name. Reaction. Quentin Nelson at 8, giddy. Dorrance Armstrong, round 2 for the Bears scheme, Agia 4, round 4, don't see it. Anthony Miller falls to round 4, I probably ejaculate in my pants. There's no probably, I would. And I feel like that's okay. I don't know that your situation or your scenario is all that realistic and necessarily matches what the Bears do defensively, but who knows? You never know. Derek Zingtara, who should the 49ers draft? When they get to pick 9, somebody in that defensive backfield. Denzel Ward, Minka, Derwin James, one of those 3, whoever's available. Based off of the way this draft is kind of playing out at this point, that's who I feel like they should be taking. Joseph Kenny, how does Davis Webb compare to this year's class of quarterbacks? He would have been behind Allen, Jackson, who else? He would have been behind Darnold. He'd have been right in line with my grading of Baker Mayfield, if I remember correctly. I can't remember which one I have grades slightly higher. I don't have the list in front of me. I don't have my grades from last year in front of me. So, unfortunately, years ago, I would be able to memorize all that stuff. The mind, as you get a little older, the flash doesn't always work as well. It can be photographic at times. Unfortunately, it's too much pornographic, especially as you get older. Just telling you fellas in your 20s what you have to look forward to. You can look like cancer patient Kane, and all these women that you run into, you think about ways that you could either fuck them or that they could fuck other women and you could watch and or fuck them. That's pretty much your life that you're looking forward to. And to the guys in their 30s and their 40s that are going to pretend like that's not the reality, well, if you're gay, more power to you. That probably is not your reality. But for the other fellas, be honest, okay? Be honest. It's like the old thing. There are 2 types of people. Those that masturbate and those that lie that say they don't masturbate. Everybody does. It's like everybody poops. Just saying. Free Nation Dre. Top 3 dream first-round picks for the Chicago Bears. Quentin Nelson. Tremaine Edmonds. Probably Denzel Ward. I think those would be the 3 dream scenarios. Or the 3 most optimal ideal players. Mark Whalen. Which top 10 talents fall out of the top 10 with the run-on quarterbacks? Derwin James could. Minka Fitzpatrick could. Those would be the 2 names. Perhaps Roquan Smith could. Maybe Tremaine Edmonds does. There's a few guys that could fall, and it's not a reflection of them. It is just the way that it goes. Like last year, when you had wide receivers go 5, 7, and 9, that starts dropping people like Malik Hooker and Jonathan Allen down the board, and other teams benefit later on down the way. Let's see what else we got. Joseph Kenny. Can Quentin Nelson move outside to tackle? Apparently, the Bengals asked him to move outside. If he did, he'd probably have to go to right tackle. I don't know if he has the feet to play left tackle. He's not the most athletic guy, and I don't know if it's a great fit for him. If you're drafting him, you want to put him in the best possible situation to succeed, not just based off of a team need. He needs to stay and play left guard, where he could probably be a Pro Bowler for a decade and an All-Pro and potentially a Hall of Famer. Jess asks, Vita Vea or Daron Payne? Depends on your team, depends on your scheme. You have to give me more specifics if you're asking for a specific team or a specific scheme. If you want a bigger run stuffer in the middle, then Vita Vea is your guy. Whether you run a 4-3, where you got a big nose there, playing next to the 3 technique, or you're talking about in a 3-4 where he's playing the nose, then probably Vita Vea. If you want somebody with a little more pass rushing upside, then it's probably Daron Payne. Trent Kinney. Josh Allen or Sam Darnold for the Browns at number 1? I feel like, based off of the scenario, it has to be Sam Darnold. It's going to be Sam Darnold, and it probably needs to be Sam Darnold. They got to play it safe. It's kind of like last year with Myles Garrett. Even though he was one of my 3 best players in the draft, he wasn't my number 1 rated player in the draft, but I totally understood why the Browns had to take him. They had to go with the safest, highest upside type of guy. Like one of those ones that if it didn't work out, nobody could blame the Browns. This time around, it's like if Sam Darnold goes number 1, it would be really hard to blame him, whereas you open yourself up to all types of criticism if Josh Allen does not work out. And even with Josh Allen being my number 1 rated quarterback, I recognize it is a tremendous risk and it is a tremendous gamble. And it is a huge exception to the rule and very likely to make me look foolish in 2 or 3 years. But you have to believe what you have to believe. Mark Kozira, what other positions could you see the Rams draft with their first pick? I forgot the rest of this question, I'll be honest, when I was typing it up here. Who could I see the Rams drafting? Because I think you were asking about linebackers. I don't think linebacker is a guarantee. It's a possibility. but I could also see offensive line being a significant possibility in them investing multiple picks in the offensive line in this draft. In fact, I'd be really surprised if the first-round pick wasn't an interior or outside lineman. I'm being honest. Jack Brown. Should the Ravens consider double-dipping at offensive line? Yes, because you got Ronnie Stanley. How much longer is Marshall Yanda going to play? The rest of the offensive line situation is not good. And instead of drafting a wide receiver or a tight end in round one and not getting much out of them potentially, you could draft offensive linemen as rookies and get them to make a day one impact. I would totally advocate for and support the Ravens drafting multiple offensive linemen in this draft. Sounds like a pretty good idea. Josh Grantham, what university would you consider DBU, defensive back U? Some people will say the U. Some people will point to Ohio State. Some people might point to a place like Texas. In recent NFL history, I think it's LSU, and it's not close. But if you're talking about all time, you're probably talking about the Ohio States and the Miamis of the world. Those are pretty good things. Like, you think about it just from Miami's standpoint. A school that produced Ed Reed and Sean Taylor, and there have obviously been other guys over the years, but just when you think Ed Reed and Sean Taylor, I mean, that's a pretty good place to start. But you look at LSU, recent years, you produced Patrick Peterson, Honey Badger, Eric Reed, Jamal Adams, and there's been other guys too. So, I mean, it's a pretty good list. I'm just saying. So, in recent years, I would go DBU being LSU. NJCT, which defensive player makes the biggest impact over the next 5 years? Defensive player that makes the biggest impact, I would point to maybe Derwin James because he plays safety. I think sometimes it's easier for a safety to make immediate and long-term impact than it would be for some of these other defensive guys. Because for the safety, it could be less scheme-dependent, and they have the ability to impact multiple areas of the game. Nick Mellott, would Rashaan Evans be a stretch for the Chargers at 17? Probably a bit of a stretch, but not a massive stretch. It wouldn't be the worst pick in the world because they could use some linebacking help. JT Evans, will more quarterbacks be drafted this year than were last year? What was the total last year? Like, I think 10? Yes, I'm pretty confident there are going to be more than 10 quarterbacks drafted this year. I would put the number somewhere probably over-under of 13.5. I feel like that's a fair odd. It's somewhere around 13.5. So, yeah, I think more will be drafted this year. Vegan 36, any chance Saquon Barkley ends up like Trent Richardson? Why or why not? There is a chance, especially if he goes to Cleveland. There is a chance because he's not the most aggressive between the tackles type of runner. There is that chance. But Trent Richardson also came from Alabama, and he came playing around a lot of talent. And Saquon Barkley's offensive line and their blocking at Penn State in 2017 was atrocious. Saquon Barkley has more athleticism. He's a much bigger threat in the passing game. Like, to me, it's much easier to see why a guy like Trent Richardson or backs like him could be a bust or a failure in the league as opposed to guys like Saquon Barkley. And then Vols fan closes us out by asking, what do Colts do at number 6 if Bradley Chubb, Quentin Nelson, and Saquon Barkley are all gone? Now, some of you might expect me to say crawl up into a fetal position, and Chris Ballard ask for a mulligan to do it all over again? It seems very unlikely that that is going to happen. I would put really good money on at least one of those 3 guys being there at number 6. The Colts are in a really good position, but if they weren't, then you still have your choice of guys like Denzel Ward and Minkah Fitzpatrick and Derwin James and Tremaine Edmonds and Roquan Smith. You've still got good choices there. It does not just have to be those 3 or bust this year for the Colts. So, you probably crawl up and cry in the fetal position initially, but you might be just fine long term if that's how it played out. So anyways, thanks everyone again for submitting your questions. Subscribe if you haven't done so already for whatever reason. The most underrated sports talker on YouTube is this guy right here, me, this face, this mug, cancer patient Kane looking mofo. Stay tuned for the scouting reports that are coming up on this channel this week, the mock draft that's coming up, and I'll be back again next weekend, Monday, whatever the hell, with another NFL draft Q&A. The draft is coming closer. We're about 1 month away exactly, and it's awesome.